Woo! Come on!
Oh yeah, I am here with Michael Blue, and you guys probably know him from this little ditty here.
Please, Mr. Spaceman, shine your light down here upon us and help we the people need love from a mighty hand.
Where did this come from? Let's start there. But before we kind of talk about who you are,
You know, I'm an artist. I've done music for many years. Lived in Los Angeles for many years, and you know, I'm a songwriter. And EOS came on the scene, and I also like graphic arts and any type of art I'm into. So EOS really garnered my attention. Dove into that ecosystem and just fell in love. And
that was all an original.
Sorry?
It was all an original song, and you did all of the video?
Yeah, well, the song actually is something that I wrote many moons ago. But when I was thinking of EOS and I was thinking, God, I want to do a video for this. And then one day I was listening to Mr. Spaceman, and I go, hey, you know, that'd be cool for EOS. So I just edited together the video, and it just kind of worked.
So you started doing rabbit hole videos of your own, which I really liked. So a couple weeks ago, Rob and I, on our regular podcast, I took everyone down some really deep wormholes, predicting some like government connections with the executive team at Block.One. And in the past, I knew about BEOS, which is Stan Larimer's project, and I talked about it on the show. But there's just so much going on with EOS right now that to kind of fill my hour maximum of time each week, I've kind of been leaving it off, and I haven't been diving as deep into the research into it, because there's a lot of wormholes you can go down with the whole BEOS thing. And I saw you recently had an interview with not just Stan Larimer, but with the entire BEOS team. So since my audience here seems to really like when I go down these rabbit holes with Rob, I think they'll really enjoy this conversation we're about to share with everybody, because I think you're on my level with wormholing into some crazy stuff that I really think has a high chance of probability in the next year.
Oh,
so,
for sure.
How did you, I guess, just even get the BEOS team to agree to come on? I mean, I guess they're just promoting their project at this point, so they'd probably go on if anyone would ask them, right? Or was it difficult?
You know, I was on the BEOS Telegram channel, and I DM'd Michael Taggart and said, you know, hey, I would love to chat with you about BEOS. You know, are you down for a Zoom call? And he said, sure. So we scheduled a date. And then on that date, I said, hey, we still on? He says, oh yeah. And by the way, Stan Larimer is going to join us too. And I was like, cool, very cool. You know, I've been following Stan, his work for many years. I've been in the space since 2013. A little bit about my background. I was heavy into the precious metal industry for many years. I owned my own brokerage. So, you know, I come from an era of actually telling clients that Bitcoin was a scam. Stay away from it. So I understand FUD, because I was FUDding Bitcoin in 2012, 2013. I finally saw the light and actually sold my brokerage, invested into Bitcoin, took a nice ride, and eventually, you know, found Ethereum. And funny enough, was skeptical of Ethereum at first, FUDded it, you know, because I was a Bitcoin, I was a gold maximalist. I was a Bitcoin maximalist, and then I became an Ethereum maximalist, because Ethereum was the world's computer, and it was going to take over everything. And you know, it's the next evolution to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's old technology. And so I rode the Ethereum train for for a number of years now. And fortunately, because it paid off well, and it enabled me to get into the EOS ecosystem, and I'd also been into Bitshares early on too. So I started following Stan and the whole team, Dan as well, and Bitshares, and so I was familiar with the Bitshares ecosystem. However, it was never really a hypey project to be in. There was never any, like right now in the EOS community, you've got all this beautiful innovation happening every day and something to talk about. Well, Bitshares never really had that. It was always like this real, sleeper thing, solid, but, sleeping. So there's periods when, I'd just hold on to Bitshares and just not even think about it and go, oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I own some of that. It's like you kind of forget about it. So fortunately, I hung on to it because once Stan started talking about his vision for BEOS and the bridge between Bitshares and EOS, I really started to take a look and diving in to the details. So that's kind of where we're at today. And for the record, I'm a huge EOS supporter and fan. But BEOS to me is the untalked about paradigm shifter on its way.
So BEOS, first of all, it's its own chain, and the tokens on it are BEOS tokens, and they're free. They're going through something called a rainfall period, where if you own Bitshares, you take your Bitshares and you stake them into a BEOS contract, essentially, and every day they call it a raindrop, but you're essentially airdropped your portion of the Bitshares token for that day. And I think the tokens drop at a 1-to-1 rate of Bitshares to BEOS. But if all of the Bitshares tokens are not staked into this contract, all of the extra tokens get distributed based on the proportion of tokens that actually are staked. So right now, I'm assuming a small percentage of Bitshares are staked, or at least smaller than there will be after more people find out about this. So the earlier you get into this, the more you could probably get from that rainfall. I personally have not participated in the rainfall, but I'm sure after this conversation, I may FOMO, and I don't know. But you said you have, and you did it with some of your OG Bitshares, and then did you end up picking some up?
I did it with 100% of my BTS. And we're 5 days into this rainfall, and I've already collected 80% of my BTS tokens in BEOS.
Nice.
So because there's less than 10% of the Bitshares community staking their Bitshares, and so it's raining mad money, into my BEOS wallet, which is actually the EOS voter wallet as well.
So I kind of just want to explain BEOS because it's very unique and serves a very good use case. So Dan Larimer gets fudded all the time about how he left these projects and moved on to the next one. He can't stick with a project. But if you actually know the whole story behind everything, he never actually, there's always a pretty good reason. So with Bitshares, he basically built a platform that could host decentralized autonomous companies, but it had limitations with being an exchange. And one of the big things was funding. So Dan Larimer himself at the time was funded through essentially a worker proposal system. And whenever that funding dried up, what are you supposed to do? And he kind of had to move on to the next thing. And he thought Steemit, social media, what was the next thing he wanted to do. And then that led to his infighting with Ned and all that fun stuff. And then he decided to do EOS because he wanted to learn from his past mistakes and build a general use case platform. So he made very specific use cases. The first two projects he had, one was a decentralized exchange. So that's essentially, at the end of the day, what Bitshares is. It's a decentralized exchange, but at the same time, it's much more than that. I'm not going to get into too much detail. But what this raindrop is doing is anyone who is an OG Bitshares holder who might have ever felt abandoned by Dan if they still have their Bitshares right now, they're going to get paid back through this rainfall, and then they're going to still own their Bitshares tokens. Once this rainfall is over, they could unstake, from what I understand, their Bitshares. They'll still have their Bitshares on the Bitshares chain, and then they'll have all these BEOS tokens on the BEOS chain. But what BEOS is trying to do is be, what do they call it? A braided chain, where it's like a mesh of the original Bitshares and EOS, so that they're taking the best from both ecosystems. The jurisdictional agility.
They're going to have nodes in space as well as nodes on cruise ships. So you can choose the jurisdiction you want to settle your transaction in. So whether it's, legal transactions, legal contracts, or currency transactions, if the zone that you're living in doesn't allow that, then you can decide to have that settle in a region that it is lawful.
And so that's the basically lawless one, which is for if you really want to escape every jurisdiction. But for enterprise, if they want to move to a blockchain-based system, they just want regulational certainty. So from what I understand, they have clusters of nodes in different jurisdictions, like Utah or like I don't know the exact countries, but let's say like Switzerland, different jurisdictions that may be favorable for different things. Maybe it's for tax purposes, or maybe it's because in this country gambling's legal and they don't want to do the outer space thing, and they want to have gambling by the letter of the law as far as regulation.
Well, literally any industry that wants certainty in terms of how they're going to be regulated. Right now, there's a lot of people out in the world that are worried that the bit license of New York applies to them, even though New York shouldn't apply to anything but New York.
Well, I would actually say that they have more of a reason to believe that now, considering the fact that Julian Assange was literally drugged out of the Ecuadorian embassy this morning by British police. He's not even a U.S. citizen, and he's being extradited to the U.S. to face charges by the U.S. he's not even subject to. So it seems like that all people in the world, regardless of whether or not they are actually a citizen of the United States, are, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States if they want it, and that's concerning to people.
And the idea that the internet may pass through New York City and your transaction packet may pass through New York and therefore be regulated by New York is an anathema to me. It's outrageous. New York should have no jurisdiction outside its own domain. And so what we are providing is something that allows businesses to put their functions out in international waters or international space, or in Utah, because Utah has great legal tender laws that isolate it from many of the draconian regulatory regimes. So we want to be able to provide that as a way for people to work. My best example, of course, not that we're doing this for the sake of promoting gambling, but when you look at what happens on cruise ships, when they sail into international waters, they open up their casino on board and operate in an unregulated way. When they pull into port, they close down their casino while they're in port. Well, that same kind of functionality would apply to every other thing that governments of the world want to regulate by keeping them out in international waters most of the time.
So it's really interesting, but it's some people may say it's not as decentralized as some other, like even regular EOS or something like Bitcoin. But at the same time, complete absolute decentralization isn't really their goal. It'll still be decentralized enough. And I think BEOS, the foundation, someone actually owns the hardware for their block producers on land. And then I think it's almost, from what I understand, this is me talking, I'm not super well researched on this, but it sounded almost like a model where you get elected, or, you make a bid or whatever to be a block producer, and you actually just are essentially leasing the I don't want to say leasing. I don't know what the payment system is, but it's almost like a franchise. I don't know if you'd call it a franchise, but it sounded like you use their hardware. They have it all set up because they took care of all of the regulation. And that's something I was really impressed with. Were you surprised by how meticulous they were with handling everything legally
We've got, like I said, and Stan said, we've got a lot of legal legwork on this. We have layers and layers and layers of what I would consider to be stops, you know.
Now, are you guys located in Virginia?
Yeah, I'm in Virginia, not too far from where Dan works with his EOS team.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm in Idaho, and I go back and forth to Utah. Idaho is another one of those maverick states. So.
But we have people in Ireland and Greece and Thailand, all over the place, who are contributing to the project. So we're not really tied down to any one state.
They've done everything very smartly, and they've got a whole team of really bright lawyers that are just, you know, dotting the I's and crossing the T's on everything that they're doing. That's why the whole BEOS raindrop was delayed many times, because they wanted to make sure that they were legal across the board. And it is a utility token, but through their legal, I guess, positioning, there's absolutely no way for them to be classified as a security. Even the BEOS token itself is backed by Quint, which is actually legal tender cryptocurrency, which is, Quints are actually backed by legal gold and silver tender in the state of Utah. So BEOS is actually backed by Quint.
Okay, now that's a neat tidbit. I had not heard that. So it is, every BEOS token is backed by a sliver of gold?
A very small one, yeah. I think it's like, 1 million BEOS tokens for 1 Quint, I think.
Okay.
Was that
it's a baseline. But you're saying that qualifies as a currency?
It is backed. So
Yeah.
Well, it is. Yeah. It does have an ultimate floor, right? And if gold goes parabolic, then hey, you know, Yahtzee, right?
Right.
And so what we decided to do is, okay, number one, we'll back BEOS with gold and silver legal tender seen by the government as being money. Number one. Number two, we will issue that through a nonprofit organization, through basically what's called a limited cooperative association. And the reason why is for a few different reasons, but one big reason is a limited cooperative association nonprofit can issue out a security without regulatory oversight or any sort of filing by state or by federal. So even if BEOS were to become or be seen as a token classified as a security, we're still compliant, right? And now we don't believe it's a security in any way, shape, or form. We already built it. There's no investors. There's already 2 of them out the window. But in case they want to, like, you know, wave their hands around and hocus pocus us on it, you know, we still are able to have the argument of it being not a security. So not only is it not a security because of those reasons, even if it was a security, we're still okay on it, but we're still contending it's not, and we're backing it by legal tender gold and silver. And you can send those tokens in and redeem it at the ultimate floor price if you want to. So it will never go to an actual zero.
And the other thing that happens is all transactions actually take place through Utah.
Right.
When you actually hand off a token to somebody, you're handing it from one account in Utah to another account in Utah. And that means that there is no money transmission happening anywhere. And so that's another thing. There's a lot of legal work we did in order to make this thing as bulletproof as possible.
And it's just a very minuscule amount, but it gives it an actual floor. It doesn't matter what the floor is, but BEOS could never reach zero. And according to them and the lawyers, that matters as far as, you know, regulation goes and being classified as a security or not. So they have definitely done their due diligence on the legal framework and positioning of BEOS, most certainly.
That was really interesting whenever I heard that, because I worked with a lot of ICOs through 2017 and 2018, and like I never saw something like that, and that was the first I heard of it. And it made sense. Think of it like metal currency today. I don't know what they're even made of today, but at one point a quarter was worth a quarter's worth of silver. So basically, even if when it was silver backed, even if the United States would collapse, that coin would still be worth the silver it was made out of. And in this case, you have a digital token, which, yeah, it could be have no value to some people, but it does, because at the very minimum, it has a tiny, tiny fraction of an ounce of gold backing it, and it's not really worth much. It's probably less than a penny, but it's not zero. And you're saying that the way they described it to you, that made all the difference. That's interesting. Does that make BEOS currency itself?
That's a question that I have, because I know Quint is legal tender. So, and that's another project of Stan and Michael Taggart's, and another one that's for the rabbit hole discussion, because we do now have a cryptocurrency that's actual legal tender, meaning you can exchange that for fiat with no tax consequence. You can buy Quint, which is the gold-backed legal tender, and you can exchange it tax-free into Quint S, which is the silver version of it. So you have gold and silver. So can you imagine the trading possibilities? Now we have legal tender crypto, instant settlement, instant buys and sells through.
Wormhole here. Mike, give me a wormhole of what this means and could mean. How about that?
Well, okay, now you have legal tender on EOS.
It's a legal tender, international and US based legal tender, gold and silver digital currency, redeemable on demand, 100% reserve on deposit, 8K video cameras pointed at the actual gold and silver in the vault, so people can actually see it and see the lot numbers and things like that. That's more of a responsible type of monetary system, and I would argue almost a banking system in that way. Rudimentary, doesn't have a ton of features yet, but able to now send any sort of store of value anywhere in the world to be redeemed for gold and silver on demand. And so imagine having the ability to have nodes in space and international waters where this type of monetary system can then reach any corner of the world. Anybody could then send any store of value anywhere else in the world, whether you're in the Sahara or Zimbabwe or in Timbuktu, doesn't really matter. And you can get that value within about 1.5 seconds right now on Bitshares. With EOS, it'll be even faster, or BEOS, right?
Let's backtrack. So we are all expecting Block.One or the community of EOS to have a true IBC. So whenever they call it a braided chain, like meshing EOS with Bitshares, they're under the assumption, I believe, that we will have an IBC sooner rather than later. And I right now, we do have these pegged wrapped tokens from chain to chain, but it's like dial-up version of IBC, and we want broadband version of IBC and eventually fiber, but that might be a few years off.
Right.
So we have these legal currencies on BEOS, completely legal. They could be jurisdictionally agile, so they're in a specific jurisdiction, let's say Utah, because that's where it seems like they did a lot of their work. And then we could move those tokens to EOS, and then we could use them on EOS for whatever we want them to, or they could be on BEOS. It depends. It's wide open right now. We haven't seen the use cases yet, but that could be interesting. Is bringing the asset-backed tokens, like the gold token, the tokenized gold. What's that company? Quintric. The other thing it does, though, is all of these companies that maybe were OGs building on Bitshares and have stuck around over these years, they now get all of the benefits of EOS, because all the EOS code's open source. Any update that EOS gets, BEOS can get, and any sidechain can, like Warbly, Talos. It's all the same. They're basically able to piggyback on probably $100 million at least of development every year going into EOS, and that basically is a cost that they don't have to assume themselves, because EOS is basically not EOS. EOSIO is being updated regularly by Block.One. And they won't admit it, so we'll say it for them. But I don't care how much Stan says he doesn't talk to Dan about his work and how much he said Dan doesn't talk to him about his work. That is complete and utter.
Yeah, I'm in Virginia, not too far from where Dan works with his EOS team.
I don't have a word for it. It's being safe. Let's say that they're father-son. I mean,
both in Virginia. You know, Stan's almost walking distance to Block.One headquarters. I mean, come on, they're both geniuses.
Exactly.
You know, hands down. They both love the space. You know, Sunday dinners. They're just like,
that's not what it's like, but that's what they'll tell us it's like. They're very close, I'm sure. But I don't want to get them in trouble. I'm just saying this is the obvious, right?
Right.
So,
and let us add, this is all speculation, of course. You know, we don't know anything, folks.
I don't own BEOS. You have some BEOS. I have none right now. I might by the time this airs. Who knows? But this is all speculation. So this is our opinions and thoughts. No one really told us anything, but I just think it's super interesting. And I know I haven't talked about BEOS, and I want to support the Larimers. I'm a big Dan Larimer fan, and I became a big Stan Larimer fan when I didn't actually learn about him until probably last August. Whenever they started publishing more stuff about BEOS, and I learned that he happened to be the godfather of Bitshares. I had never known that before.
Yeah, he's a good man. I mean, top to bottom, he's a good man.
So let's get into some conspiracies. We promised people wormholes here, and we're being really informative and educational here. We got to get a little crazy. So some background on Stan Larimer. So with some of my recent EOS episodes, we talked about how EOSIO or Block.One is potentially doing government contracts and government work. Stan Larimer himself has a background working for some government organizations, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, well he's an engineer. I mean, he's working on a model for BEOS through Sovereign Sky, where you'll be able to rent sky time. Which means if you want to, and he's facilitating this himself. He's engineering this where you'll be able to rent.
So he's like a rocket engineer. He's not like, and there's a lot of engineers. He's specifically worked in like aerospace engineering. So let's like get that out for the people who didn't realize that.
Exactly. And he's got a lot of NASA connections and astronauts actually working with him and advising him. And I'll go through those connections here in a minute, but he's actually working on the mechanism that you'll be able to rent telescopes in space and rent time to research Mars or whatever. You know, whatever you want to aim that camera at, you'll be able to aim it at and do your research. And
this is the project called Mission Space, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess. So there's a few things to get excited about, but it's all like a mishmash of the same team with a couple extra key players added in that are like for the Mission Space. There's some space related companies and executives on the team. And so there's a couple projects here. So there's BEOS, that's the actual blockchain platform. But then there's Mission Space, which you said has telescopes in space, and some of them are already in space. There's Are You On, which is a social media platform. Coincidence, right?
Yeah. Which is amazing.
Yeah. So we'll get into that. And then there was a third. The third one's Sovereign Sky. And Sovereign Sky is like a mesh low satellite orbiting network. And we have talked about that on my regular podcast before. But in your interview with them, it sounded like it wasn't going to be ready for June 1st, or do you think that was purposefully done in the way they answered you?
You know, I know they have 2 microsatellites up already. So I know that they're a good 18 months away from, I guess, from what I gathered, significant, network in space. So, but they do have 2 microsatellites in space now.
And those were launched in December. So that was the SpaceX launch that we talked about on an old episode. But regardless of the space, the satellites, I think they could still do that jurisdictional agility on just international waters without the satellite. I don't think that's a necessary component for them to do what they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they have 1 or 2 nodes in space. Yes, they could use them, but I don't think they're even needed. They're still on international waters.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because going through the different players involved in Sovereign Sky and RU1, one of the gentlemen was deep player in the Royal Caribbean cruise line. So there's connections to Royal Caribbean cruise lines from a big player. In my mind, without a doubt, this has been something being worked on behind the scenes for many, many years. And even Michael Taggart, in an interview I watched today, he was mentioning about the early days when he and Dan Larimer and Stan Larimer were around the kitchen table, and everything that is coming to fruition right now was part of that dreaming phase that they all took place in.
I'm going to tell you guys this. I got conference calls that we used to have, and I used to record them so we could review it later on, some of the call, because they would go on for hours sometimes, of Stan and me and Dan Larimer and a few other people on that call discussing, the features that were going to be put into Bitshares. During those conversations, you would hear things about how we were going to later on build a social network and build an operating system based off of the graphene protocol. And this is 4 years ago, at least 4, maybe 5 years ago. This is 2014, 2015. And this is how long this has been in the making. I can prove to you guys and anybody else that this has been a part of the process and in the wheelhouse and in the actual sites the entire time, and it's taken this long to get there, but it's been the intention.
So he basically gave the hint that, yeah, everything's, pretty much on schedule from what we dreamed up years ago around the kitchen table. So that's what I've learned about these rabbit holes I've gone down is Dan and it sounds like his father and Michael Taggart, they were all together at Cryptonomics at one point. Dan is the original founder of Cryptonomics, and that's the company that built graphene. And it's the company that Michael Taggart and Stan Larimer are both like CEO and president of. I actually asked Dan if he was still a partner in that company. I did it publicly in Telegram, and he said no. That was a lot of fun, Zach. Thanks for having me on the show, for going down these crazy rabbit holes with me. I hope to do this again sometime soon.
Hey, if you're willing to do the dirty work of the editing, you can come on this channel anytime you want. I love doing this stuff. I usually do it with my hands in Telegram. Like the first face-to-face I had with Mike, we've talked on Telegram many of times. But I had a lot of fun here. I don't have a great sign-off, but I'm Zack Gall.
Michael Blue.
All right. Until next time, this is Everything EOS, BEOS, I don't know what we want to call this. We'll have to think of a title.
EOSIO, rabbit hole.
We got to do it for Rob. I don't know why we keep doing this. I'm not in the military or anything, so sorry guys. I didn't really plan to sign off for this. You were? Sorry.
I was in the Marine Corps.
So you're allowed to do it. I could do it, I guess, out of respect for you. But I think out of respect for Rob Finch, we should end it with let's try to synchronize Go EOS at the same time. And if we mess it up, no retakes. So we got to time this up. Ready?
Okay.
We're going to say Go EOS.
3, right. 2, 1, Go EOS!
All right. That's a good sign off.